Welcome back to the leading edge of integrative mental health. I'm your host, Lisa Dale Miller. Please review and subscribe to the Groundless Ground podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, YouTube, radio.com, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and of course find out more at groundlessground.com. I'm ready to go. How about you? This episode is a Dharma talk I gave at Marin Sangha on 9/13 when we were experiencing insane wildfires burning throughout our area. The talk focuses on the Fire Sutta as a means to explore collective conduct and personal responsibility, particularly in the midst of extreme life circumstances such as 2020 continues to bring many of us. My intention in releasing it now is to incline every eligible American to vote with the preservation of our democracy foremost in mind. Our president and Senate leaders have failed us in so many ways. 200,000 unnecessary deaths from COVID-19, a complete lack of interest in the obvious deleterious effects of climate disruption, and their direct attempts to undermine voting and American democracy. We each have the power to restore our nation to sanity, our government to health, and to bring back wisdom, intelligence, and collective care as the central motivation for our nation. I wish every eligible American a smooth and easeful voting process.
When we met last week, maybe none of you thought it could possibly get worse. We woke up and it never got light. Tuesday, we still had fire burning. We're about 90% contained now. The word I heard most was apocalyptic. I don't know. I never thought I would see anything like this in my lifetime. I think I said that last week, didn't I? About 2 years ago, I started to seriously look around for another place to live because I pretty much had it with Silicon Valley. Right now, 4 of the places that I had chosen to go are gone. They've been burned. Several of these places are places where people in cities fled to because of COVID-19. I'm sure some of you are aware the cities have been emptying out since March. It caused me to start thinking about the nature of safety. What really is safety? Is safety really something to seek, after all? Because apparently we seem to get it wrong a lot. So we feel danger where we are, and then we go looking for a safer place. And I can only tell you that in the last 3 weeks, I have heard stories of people who had just bought and moved into a house. They had just left wherever they'd been to be safe, and they'd moved into a house, were evacuated, and the house is gone. Sort of take a moment and contemplate the ramifications of thinking that you know what's gonna work. And then life throws you a curveball, and life doesn't appear to work the way you thought it was gonna work. And safety is one of those things. It's conditioned. It's conditional. It's impermanent. It comes and goes. Somehow we've become very addicted to safety, or at least this delusional idea of safety. And our delusional idea of safety is nothing bad ever happens. And I think we can all pretty much attest at this point. Our spectrum of bad things that can happen has just gone completely awry. Bad things we have no control over. The place where we live here in the Bay Area, I mean, we shouldn't really think we have any control anyway. It's either going to be an earthquake, mudslide, flood, or a fire. This is the nature of the place that we live in without climate change. And ultimately, whatever idea we have about what's safe is going to be thrown out the window in one way or another. Because safety is conditioned. It's subject to impermanence. You know, the suffering here is real. It's hard to really know in the face of dramatic loss what you could possibly offer someone in terms of anything that would make sense. Sometimes a lot of the Buddhist teachings don't actually make sense when it comes to the extremity of human experience. I know, you're probably thinking, wow, why is she saying this? This is not like Lisa. So I went to look at the Aditya Pariyaya Sutta one last time, the Fire Sutta. I thought, everything's ablaze. I should look at the Fire Sutta. I should see what it says. And I am sure you've all heard the Fire Sutta over and over and over again. No? I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but most Buddhist teachers teach this sutta at least once in their early career because it's a really good sutta for describing the core of the Buddhist teachings. I guess I will read this sutta to you all. Shall I do that? Yes? The Buddha was staying at Gaya Head with 1,000 monks, and he addressed the monks with this particular talk. He said, "The all is a flame. What is this all that is a flame? The all that is a flame is the 5 senses, all forms, consciousness itself, any contact a human mind has with any phenomena. And not only those things, but whatever there is that arises along with that contact, whatever we experience, is a flame with pleasure, pain, or neutrality. And pleasure, pain, and neutrality are also a flame." And then the Buddha continued, and he said, "A flame with what? A flame with the fire of passion, the fire of aversion, the fire of delusion, ignorance, hatred, and greed. These are all a flame. A flame, finally, is birth, aging, and death. So pretty much all human experience is a flame, according to the Buddha." And then he continues, and he says, "The intellect is also a flame. Ideas are a flame. Consciousness, as it shows up in your intellect, is a flame. The very contact we have with the intellect is a flame. So this means everything we think is also a flame." And the Buddha continues, "All this, whatever arises in dependence on contact with the intellect, with our thoughts, is experienced as pleasure, pain, or neutrality. All that too is a flame. And seeing thus, the well-instructed disciple of the Buddhist path grows disenchanted with the 5 senses, with all forms, with every form of consciousness, all contact your mind might have with anything, and also the intellect." It doesn't leave too much else, does it? And not only those things, everything we might experience that is dependent, which arises with contact, because all of that contact is experienced as either pleasure, pain, or neutrality. So the Buddha continues, "Thus disenchanted, one becomes dispassionate. Through dispassion, one is fully released. With full release, there is knowledge, and that knowledge is the ending of birth and the fulfillment of the holy life." And the Buddha says in his conclusion, there is nothing further in this world than that. Quite the sutta, huh? One of the Buddha's more definitive moments, where he says, anything we might experience internally or externally due to its conditioned nature is a flame. Flame. It's an interesting metaphor. Fire is actually very life-giving. Down here where the fires were, the Cal Fire commander overseeing all the firefighting efforts. About a week and a half in, Chief Bruton basically said, the Redwoods love this. The Redwoods dream of having fire like this because it basically decimates everything that gets in the way. And you know, redwoods are kind of a fire retardant. They sort of live on fire. And he said this because Big Basin, many of you may have hiked in Big Basin, which is here. Everything is gone in Big Basin, but the redwoods are perfectly happy. And this is the nature of fire. Everything that burns turns into food. And the Buddha clearly is pointing at the destructive nature of being a flame internally. And yet, you know, as somebody who spent many years as a professional visual artist, I have to say, the energy of fire is the energy of creativity. So even though it's destructive, there has to be a tremendous amount of energy for all that destruction to occur. Inspiration is definitely a fire element experience, as is creativity. And yet, here's the Buddha, even pointing at the intellect, even pointing at all our brilliant ideas, everything human beings have ever learned, every truth we've ever gained. He's still saying all this is a cause for hatred, greed, and delusion. And so for the Buddha, being a flame means that there is a loss of awareness of the effect of anything that may be coming into our five senses, anything that may be conjured up out of the intellect, all contact we may have with any phenomena, any people, any experience, all of it has the potential to burn us when we are not aware. And even though awareness, the word mindfulness, none of the words of attention, none of it is here in this sutta. And yet the Buddha is pointing at it completely because of this last part of the sutta. Disenchantment leads to dispassion. When I read this sutta this week, this was the part where I went to the most. It's easy to become disenchanted with our life circumstances right now. I mean, I don't know about all of you, but life is so bizarre. What is the nature of dispassion in the midst of a situation that requires so much engagement and so much passion on our part? And I'm not just talking about the fires burning. I mean, it is the second week of September, so we have a limited time between now and when our elections occur. Forgive the pun, but I think a lot of people are fired up about this. And you have to ask yourself, well, what would the Buddha say about this? How in the world does a human being express the intensity and the importance of voting this year without being passionate? How do you do that in the midst of dispassion? Now, I know lots of people are disenchanted with our political system, and I know a lot of people are disenchanted with all kinds of things right now because the world is such a mess. Our human condition is really in our face at this point. We can see our own fallibility, we can see our own frailty, and we don't like it one bit. So we get disenchanted. But I don't think it's the kind of disenchantment that the Buddha is pointing at. I think the disenchantment that the Buddha is pointing at is a refusal to be lost, to be unconscious. Every time we go unconscious, we get in trouble, which of course is what the rest of the sutta is all about, is the trouble we get into because we become aflame with our own unawareness. And unawareness takes a lot of forms. There's the unawareness of ego over involvement. And we've definitely seen that in 2020. People became very self-involved around COVID. And they latched onto whatever point of view they had, They did think about everyone else, and they only thought about their safety, only needed to get what they had to get. And there is a tremendous amount of collective selfishness that has characterized 2020. And the extreme of this aflame, has got to be the violence by police against people who, frankly, did not warrant being killed. That is aflame. Not being able to discern what's really in front of you, being lost, being deluded. If I see black skin, it must mean this. Greed. Oh, I need to make sure I'm safe. I should not be seeking the safety of someone else. I shouldn't be careful. So the disenchantment that the Buddha is pointing to, collective care, seeking the well-being of others more than we seek the well-being of ourselves. And this is a hard thing to do, because there's so many things that are compelling each one of us to try to take care of ourselves. And yet I think every one of us can look carefully at how we're being selfish. That selfishness is the flame. That's the thing that burns. And it doesn't just burn us, it burns everyone else we're around. When you realize that your own selfishness doesn't have much to offer you, or certainly doesn't have to offer you what you think it has to offer you. We all think when we seek our own care, just as I asked all of you to do in the meditation, right? We all think when we seek our own care, we're doing something good. I think the Buddha would disagree. When you seek your own care, what gets missed? What gets left out? What is not being cared for? And the Buddha probably would ask every one of us to question, are you really that important? Can you become disenchanted with the idea of your own importance? So if we can become disenchanted with our own self-importance, the level of flame comes down. In the Anapanasati Sutta, one of the final steps is quenching. And quenching leads to nibbana, which is coolness. Actually, that is the accurate translation of nibbana, coolness. And this coolness is coolness as opposed to being aflame with hatred, greed, and delusion. And again, in that context, aflame means unawareness. One's thoughts, words, and deeds are replete with hatred, greed, and delusion, and therefore we are aflame. So the coolness comes from dispassion, disinterest, not being hoodwinked any longer by the selfishness. And this is, I think, at the core of this particular sutta, dropping the entire project of selfishness. And the Buddha says, when we become disenchanted with selfishness, too much self-focus, then through this dispassion we are released. Released from what? Released from being lost, unawareness, not knowing that our motivation is being driven by greed, aversion, or delusion. This is the core of the Buddha's teachings. If you don't get anything else from Buddhism, this is it. If you really, really get that the Buddha's main thrust was look at your own selfishness, see the deleterious effects on you and on everyone else. See how it burns you and causes you to grasp tightly to the things you don't like, so much so that you have to move away from them. You have to diss them. And equally grasping so tightly to the things you just have to have, right? Like that HEPA filter. You just gotta have it. But of course, everybody's gotta have it now. Nobody ever wanted them before, but now everybody's gotta have a HEPA filter, so there are none. This is the nature of greed. And it's tricky. My lungs are trashed But that's largely because I have been living in a place with no air conditioning, so there's no way to close this house. I haven't had the luxury of air conditioning and all these filters. It's just the way it is. And I don't begrudge anybody who has all of that and who's been able to keep their lungs healthier than mine certainly are at this point. And yet, I still grasp. This is the rub. All these years of practice, all these years of study, and yet still, I'm driven by greed, hatred, and delusion. Seemingly, I cannot get away from it because of my humanness. And therefore, there is a part of me that has to become disenchanted with the idea of being an enlightened being. And even that I have to become dispassionate about. And just decide that I can only do what I can do as best I can to live an ethical life, knowing that I will not be an enlightened Buddha. Yes, I know, I'm already an enlightened Buddha. I get it. No, I am just a fallible human being. Can I live my fallibility without being a flame? This is the key. I'm trying to do this. And yet, it's very difficult in the extremity of circumstances that we all find ourselves in. How to do the middle way in the middle of extreme. But the fact that I'm asking the question itself means I'm not lost. It means I'm not asleep. So there's something right there. Being a flame really happens when we're not asking the question, when we're not looking to do something beyond our expectation, beyond our assumptions, when we really are doing whatever we can to be awake. Yeah, we might not be fully awake, and I'm definitely not fully quenched. I'm not even halfway quenched. In fact, I'm not even a quarter of the way quenched. But every once in a while, I experience some coolness. Actually, I'll give you a good example. So today, I did something I would never do. I'm moving into this apartment on Tuesday, and there was a thing I really had to have from IKEA. I don't know, 2 o'clock this afternoon. And I said to myself, I don't have any time in the next few days to do this. I need to do this now, but it's Sunday. I never go to IKEA on Sunday because IKEA on Sunday it's insane, and COVID has made it even worse. You can only have so many people in the store. I decided to go. Yes, almost no parking spaces. Yes, I get there. Incredibly long line, 6 feet apart. I just decided to be cool. I'm here. And since I'm here, why not just be here? Why not just fully be standing on line as long as it's going to take? Pretty much know what I need to get. I know where the bin is. Once I get in, it should be fairly fast. Everything just came down a notch, and all the flame that I always predict I will have on Sunday at IKEA if I ever go there, it just dissipated because there was awareness, because there was presence, because there was a desire for dispassion in the midst of circumstances where most of us would be inflamed. I didn't even realize it until I'm giving this talk, actually, that this happened today. So it's kind of timely that this happened for this talk. You know, at the end of this sutta, the Buddha, he uses the term fully released. I'm bringing up my experience today at IKEA because, no, I was not enlightened at IKEA. Trust me, I did not reach enlightenment. I was fully released from any distress. I just stood online, went in, got what I needed to get, got back in my car, and was here an hour before we started. This is a life without being a flame. If I could only have this more, I think it would be good, even in the midst of the extremity that we are in. And after the Buddha talks about being fully released, and I've given you a very mundane experience of full release in the moment, the Buddha says that once you have an experience of release, of this full release from being disenchanted with the flame, with the upset, with the self-centeredness, and that leads to this dispassion, which in fact is letting go of that, letting go of the flaming. And he says, once you have that experience, you discern, meaning you realize Birth is over, and the holy life is fulfilled, and the task is done, and there is nothing further for this world. This is two really incredible sentences that the Buddha ends this sutta with. Once you've had an experience of fully released, you can't go back. You realize there's no point in taking birth in self-obsession. What he calls the holy life, but what I would say is a level of beingness, contentedness, presencing that feels like there's nothing else to do. There I was, standing online. There was literally nothing else to do but be in the experience of the line at IKEA. And I didn't need to add anything. I didn't need to take anything away. It's just online. Me devoid of my specialness. Me devoid of my need to be in there. Me devoid of not having what certainly was 50 people, at least, in front of me online. And then the Buddha says the task is done. Yes, there's nothing to do. When Buddhists say nowhere to go, nothing to do, this is kind of what they mean. It doesn't mean you're a slug and you don't do things and there's nothing to experience or nowhere to go. It's just, what more is there to do except just be on the damn line? Reflect on your day today as we start to come to the end of my talk. Was there a moment today when you were aflame with your own self-importance? Aflame with your own needs, aflame with your own opinions, your own drives, your beliefs, your own truth. And then ask yourself, wow, what would that moment have been like if I had not been lost in my selfing? And I had managed to just be as it is. Nothing added, nothing taken away, me as I am. No glorification. And maybe if you can imagine that moment like that, you get a taste of this dispassion that leads to the quenching of not needing anything more, which eventually turns into the coolness, the capacity to not be aflame with greed, hatred, and delusion. Does anybody want to share something?
That's a big bite to actually think about fear and turn around and face the fear of greed, hatred, and delusion, and to acknowledge that that's there and to acknowledge it's not going to help. But recognizing, well, I never earned it that way before, I don't think. I never just turned and said, yep, they're there. Yep, I don't have to be afraid of them. Yep, that has to do with safety. That has to do with awareness. That is where we're trying to get.
Yes. You're already there. We just don't realize we're there. Yeah, fear is such an interesting thing, isn't it? You're so directly pointing at the flame.
Of course.
So in Vajrayana Buddhism, there actually is a phrase. It's called turning the jewel of the mind. What happened for you was exactly what they point out when they say turn the jewel of mind. And what it means is if you just shift the view slightly, there's something there that wasn't there before. And then the other thing I want to just say is, even though in Theravada Buddhism, we use the words craving and aversion, over in Vajrayana Buddhism, they use hope and fear. So hope is greed and fear is aversion. The weirdness of having fear for something that is, according to Jade Tsongkhapa, at the root of every single possible phenomenal experience we have, which is either greed, hatred, or delusion. It's just at the most innate root source. And so it's kind of hard to get away from, which means it's kind of hard, why be afraid of something that is at such a deep level? May all of us dedicate our merit from our practice to the benefit of all sentient beings everywhere. May all beings be free from every form of suffering. And my heart goes out to all of you, and I wish you a beautiful fall. Hopefully I will see all of you again in 2021, which hopefully will be a different kind of year.
Thanks for listening to today's show. To get in touch, please visit groundlessground.com. Let's dedicate our efforts to the healing of our planet and all its inhabitants. See you next time on the Groundless Ground.